What is different in the token economy, and why do these differences matter? The panel will be moderated by David Waxman, founder of the New York-based PR agency Waxman PR, also one of our gold sponsors. The panelists for the discussion will be, and may I ask you to just come up in exactly that order, Alexander Balkin, co-founder of coinfund.io, Ransu Salovara, CEO of the token market, Dominic Zainis, co-founder Wings Foundation, and John Quinn, co-founder of Storage. So with that, have a fantastic panel. The discussion's with you. Thank you.
Everyone. Is this mic on? Okay, everyone take a seat. So hi everybody, I am David Waxman. I'm the founder of Waxman PR. We represent about 50 companies in the blockchain space today, including many of the companies in the audience. It's been pretty extraordinary. And with regard to Switzerland, we represent the Crypto Valley Association and Bitcoin Suisse, two of the institutions that have really driven the progression of the crypto industry in this country. Today with me is a particularly illustrious panel. And so, although the topic is the token economy, the truth is the token economy is comprised of, well, a lot of different sectors. So, I'm going to let everyone here introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a dynamic conversation about where we are today, how we got here, and what's next. So, start with you, Alexander.
Can you repeat the question?
Who are you, and how did you get here?
Thank you. Sorry. I got here because I got really interested in the technology and its applications to how people work together. I just found it really promising. I got really interested, started reading white papers, and went down the rabbit hole faster than you can say token.
Okay. Ransu, tell us about yourself.
So I ended up on this one because we started to work on 3 years ago how to securitize or how to tokenize securities, and that was way too early.
Yeah.
And we kind of suffered that. Okay, how can we turn that workable model? And then ICOs came along, and kind of suddenly we were on the business.
Tell us about token market. What do you guys do?
So we are basically full on like 360 advisors for ICOs, probably about 10% of the market, because we have done 170 million worth of fundraising this year, 18 ICOs, and those tokens are trading usually between 700 million and 1 billion. We are 15 full-time employees.
Excellent. Dominic?
My name is Dominic Zainis. I'm one of the co-founders of Wings. But before Wings, I've been involved in this space since about 2012 with one of the first platforms for, well, we didn't call them ICOs at the time because they sounded too much like IPO, but it was called Mastercoin. It's still around as Omni. And, you know, it's come a long way since then. I remembered when we did Made Safe, which was one of the first crowd sales. And at the time, I think I was over exuberant. I thought it would reach 1,000 coins per quarter within a year or two. But here we are now at the stage. And so with Wings, what we try to do is basically use the power of crowd artificial intelligence to help with the valuation of these ICOs, of their valuation. And then later in 2018, we're going to also implement like a reputational system to also assign reputation to people for their forecasting ability, but also for their promotional kind of, let's say, book building ability to bring in the funds for projects that they actually like.
And John, how did you get here?
Good question. So I'm a co-founder of Storage. It's a decentralized cloud storage platform. So it's kind of like Airbnb for your disk drive. Anyone can plug in and become part of the cloud. My background is traditional finance. I was an investment banker at Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, and then I helped run a $200 million private equity fund, and I became fascinated in the tokenization of finance. Helped build Storage from 2015, and we recently completed a $30 million ICO, or token sale, because we basically had an existing token. We were actually advised by both
Yeah.
both these guys on the right there. So super helpful to work with them.
Excellent. So this panel here is capable of talking about, I'd say, much of the space from the history. 2012 is an eternity, to use William's expression, up until what's happening right here and now. I think you've got the finger on the pulse of the industry. So the first question is one that actually I think really needs to be asked. Is it an ICO? Is it a TGE? Is it a TDE or something else? John, what do you think?
ICO is kind of a bad word when you speak to lawyers. They very much favor the whole token sale. So in all our disclosure, we basically used the token sale nomenclature. I think that ICOs generally, it kind of sounds very similar to an IPO. It will maybe attract the ire of the regulators.
Alexander?
we think of ICOs as more like IUAs, initial user acquisition events. I think that's the only sane way of looking at it. Everything else kind of is too detached from what you're trying to build.
Yeah, so that really brings up a very interesting point. How do you explain what an ICO is or a token sale is to someone who doesn't know anything about crypto? I mean, many people liken it to, as you say, kind of acquiring users for your initial protocol, platform, resource, whatever it may be. How do you explain it, Ransu?
Well, they don't have to be users, right? They can be just speculators, which is hard to say, what is what, right? On a case of like Civic, everybody had to use the mobile app there, so they really then got a lot of new downloads for the app, for the KYC app, so that worked well. I wouldn't
How do you explain it to, let's say you were talking to someone not in this room? How would you explain what an ICO is?
I normally start from crowdfunding angle.
Okay.
That it is crowdfunding, but it's not equity crowdfunding, or you don't send a product in advance, or like a skateboard, you don't get that, you get tokens. And then those tokens will be, the important thing is that they are functionable on the platform at some point, and that way they can be exceptions to the securities law.
So as of right now, there aren't a lot of, to William's point earlier, there aren't a lot of users on these platforms. So Dominic, when we're talking about these token sales, who's buying? Is it just speculators?
I don't think it's just speculators. There's definitely people that are longer-term investors, and then there are people that, in our case, for example, with Wings, there are people that actually were genuinely interested in using the platform. And I think you see that as well with StoreJ as well. I was in the original StoreJ crowd sale or whatever, and one of the reasons was, and this is kind of crazy, but I thought, one day, maybe I want to upload my brain to the internet, and if I get in on this now, it's going to be pretty cheap for me, So anyway, so there's definitely people that are interested and are actual users, and I think William had that kind of, there was like 4 different categories he had there. I think it really comes down to really 2 categories. One is something that's more of a security type thing, and in that case, there is still some value there because there are places in the world where they don't have really good regulation, and so, or the court system is not that great. And so, yeah, in the West we have great court systems, but someone in, let's say, South America or Africa might not have those opportunities, and this is a way for them to participate in sort of an asset class that they don't necessarily have easy access to. And then on the other side, for people that are in more, these places where we have regulation and jurisprudence and all that, and rule of law, now is the opportunity to participate in the building of sort of new types of global organizations that are leveraging people from around the world into, renting part of their disk space, or in our case, just giving us, their opinion of the valuation of something, or I don't know. There's a lot of other things out there, but it's a way to participate, and that's kind of the virtual organization.
So are these participants individuals? Because it seems to me, and to a lot of people in this room, that the whales are capturing a lot of these token sales. and they're getting in early. So as a fund, as perhaps the first token fund, what do you say? Are the whales too dominant in the space?
It kind of looks that way, but you have to think in several dimensions at the same time, right? And one of those dimensions is that, ideally, large ICO participants. So you can't really separate between user acquisition and speculative participation, right? Because there's no better promoter of your project than a good speculator, right? Think about it. So on one hand, that's kind of one of the ways in which the loop gets closed with crypto finance is that your speculators really want the token to appreciate, so they're very much incentivized to make sure that your project succeeds and gets promoted. On the other hand, we do see this dynamic where there is an early sort of an exclusive kind of group of funds and large participants that really capture a tremendous amount of value exclusively, and I think ultimately that if that continues, it will probably hurt the space more than it will help it.
So how are we going to go and get millions of people to join us in this room into the crypto space? It's still very, very challenging. Anyone who's had to create a wallet, even the most simple like Jax, it's still complicated. There's a lot of challenges. So how are we going to go and solve these problems and get lots of users onto your platform, for instance, John?
So we have about 25,000 farmers, people that are sharing their disk space, and that we have an aggregate about 8 petabytes. So we grew that over 1,000x last year with near zero capex, near zero opex, and we'd like this year to increase that by 10 to 20x and get in the exabyte range in terms of data storage capabilities. And that's on the supply side of our marketplace, people providing access to their disk space. On the demand side, we have over 40,000 developers that are using storage as a data layer with applications building on top of it. And again, the token, which we had about 17,000 participants in our offering, those holders are acting, and I think this is quite frankly an underappreciated element of a token sale, is that we get massive network effects from the people that participate in the sale that then want to use our service and recommend our service to third parties. And so that's what we're really seeing, going back to Alex's point, is a user acquisition tool in addition to being a great financing tool.
So who are these users? Are they people who bought Bitcoin and ETH early? What countries are they from and how old are they?
Yeah, most of them are white males under the age of 25. Many of them still have acne and are in high school. But I think that the dispersion of them globally, interestingly, Amsterdam, Berlin, San Francisco, New York are our biggest. But we're located in over 50 countries globally, and it's growing outside of the U.S. and Europe faster than it's growing inside of U.S. and Europe.
Well, some ICOs don't even allow for American participation, Rensu. I know you've had to work with some. Do you think that is a challenge?
Oh, it will be always a challenge. And I think it's like half of our ICOs have blocked US. And you basically have to then double block it so that you have to say that, are you American? No, thrown out. And then also the IP blocking so that...
Right, and now there's even KYC, of course, that people are doing on token sales. That's becoming a best practice. And they're actually digging into, are you an American or are in some way connected to an American? Are they the ultimate beneficiary? So we've seen that Americans, let's say, are blocked out of some. And now, of course, news has come that China has effectively banned ICOs, or at least on a temporary basis. That's what speculators say. What effect does that have on the promotion of token sales, Dominic?
I think the American thing is going to get figured out. So you can see it sort of opening up already, and the law firms have been doing a lot of work on this over the last few years to sort of set things up right. And the fact is that if you want to do something that's a security, at least for Americans, you can just release the stock and go on the regulated kind of thing, path. If you can really, like in our case with Wings, when we first started Wings, our lawyers looked at it and said, okay, guys, this is probably a security. And so we had to re-architect it, and by re-architecting it and thinking about how to really decentralize it, how to make the value flow from the user, We actually came up with a much more sophisticated and I think better system by actually having to go through that exercise. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, and I think that the smart people and the smart groups will figure out how to do that and how to access Americans. As far as China, yeah, I think it's a temporary thing, and my understanding is the Communist Party just wants a piece of the action. So,
And it is so, like, if you have a really pure application token, you don't have to block America.
Yeah.
Like, you fine. Like, and we've talked with the SEC and with the top law firms. And if you do everything correctly, you're fine. But then if there's any nuances of these kind of, even buybacks and all,
but it's
dividend
difficult.
type.
It's difficult.
You're talking
to
about
actually
buybacks as a substitute for paying out dividends or rev share, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Any of that, it's immediately then security.
Right.
And then on that one more note, that securities offerings will be really tricky because there is no such a thing as a global retail securities offering. That then you would have to go country by country and make your prospectus okay to do it as a, security.
So let's get into
Very
securities tokens in a little bit, because I think that's a totally new arena that doesn't yet exist. There's only 2 instances that are well known today. Of course, there's going to be more securities tokens in the future. And then there's the secondary market issue, which we should talk about, as what's the value of a token if there's no liquidity. But let's go more into the geography angle here. So what's the next great growth arena for tokens? We know, again, China has been pretty dominant. Obviously, the US, there's been a lot of innovation. We're here in Switzerland, of course, the home of token sales. But where is it not yet ubiquitous, where it may be soon, Alexander?
Actually, I'm going to withhold pointing at a specific point on the map, but instead say that I think, in talking about regulation by country, we're actually talking about a fundamental shift and kind of an associated conflict with that, which is a conflict between having borders and not having borders, right? And, if one country restricts an activity which is kind of by definition really borderless, then what does that really mean, and how well will this work is kind of my question. So, we're dealing with global teams. A lot of these projects have members from all over the world. There are secondary markets in jurisdictions that barely regulate them at all. Some jurisdictions are becoming kind of hubs that create favorable regulation to attract this market. And to what extent a regulator that wants to restrict this activity in their geography can actually succeed at doing that is really a big question. So to me, to answer your question, I think the resolution to that we are yet to see as to kind of who wins, the traditional models or the global models.
Well, on that note, who's going to win? Let's talk about a different type of winning. What types of coins are the winners today, and which ones are going to be the winners tomorrow? So there's been an investment thesis that's been proposed that protocols are the only things worth investing in. What do you think about that, Alexander?
I find it strange that people would make such a strong distinction. First of all, I don't really know what a protocol means. I know there are platforms and I know there are applications of those platforms. I think when people think about a protocol, as an engineer, I don't understand the way that they use that word at all. Now, if I take them as saying, well, we want to invest in platforms and not in apps, well, a platform is nothing without the apps that are running on top of it, right? And also, I already kind of expressed this idea that applications are probably going to be more integrated with their specific platform and less reliant on a common platform. This is not quite happening yet, but I think it probably eventually will. And if you think about an economics of how the application economics and the platform economics work, you have Ether that pays for your transactions, and then you have the application token that pays you, gives you access to the services of those applications. The fact that they're 2 different tokens actually is really inconvenient and creates all kinds of usability problems going forward. So, Now, think of that as merging together, and think of your application token as actually being something that you mine on the platform that runs that application. that becomes much more natural, and the technology will eventually get there. And also at the same time, applications is what users use, not the platform. Users, ultimately, end users, are not going to care about what platform your application is running on. So these distinctions, I really find completely artificial.
Well, your coin storage is something that's going to be used in a lot of different, let's call it tech stacks. Many different applications are coming out. I know a lot of companies are going to be partnering with storage because, well, they need it as part of their overall system. How is that going to work for end users, and is that something that investors today understand?
I'm not sure if they understand it or not, but what we're seeing are different applications, different protocols actually building on top of the storage protocol. For instance, there's a DRM, digital rights management protocol that then anyone could use, but then that data would be stored on the storage network. There's a CDN application. So we see that, that these things will kind of click together like Lincoln Logs. I think higher up the stack, it gets much more difficult, but lower stack, companies like storage, I think, we'll have lots of partners and channel partners in order to work with as these kind of protocols, kind of lock together with one another.
Do you find that, Dominic, application-specific tokens, that those have value to investors, speculators, participants today?
I think you have to, speculators are generally short-term traders, but I think if you were looking at it from a longer term, that is where the money will flow eventually when the value is there. But of course, it depends on the user acquisition and adoption rates and that sort of thing. And so obviously, in my personal opinion, I would take a broader sort of approach in investing in those because it's really hard to tell like who's going to be able to execute, who will get the user traction, who is too early. Right? In the case of Storage, they've already been working on this for, is it like 3 or 4 years now, right? So 3 or 4 years, they have traction, right? They have partners and people willing to use the protocol, but it's still very early, right? So in my perspective, well, traditionally in the VC industry, like back before, I don't know, the last decade, it was the investments were longer term investments, 5-10 year horizons, and really. In this space, that's how I look at it. I look at it from that perspective because, okay, right now the market is down 40% from the high because the China thing and because of someone said this or that or whatever. But, at the end of the day, do we think we're going to go back to like centralized apps? I don't think so. It's like, are we going to go back to using mainframes? No. So, this is the future. That's how the apps are going to get built. But who's going to be able to execute on the vision and bring in the users, and which apps are going to provide value to humanity and society? Those are the ones that are going to succeed.
The space. Thank you very much. The space in at the end of the year last year. So on January 1, we were at about $17.7 billion. The cryptocurrency space in total. As William mentioned earlier, we hit a high of 172 billion earlier this year, and although we've dropped down, it's still far higher than we were, and so yields have been very, very good. Has this made it easy for you to go and find organizations to work with to raise money? Are companies able to raise money successfully today, as successfully as they were, let's say, a couple months ago when things were perhaps even more hype than we are now? Ransu.
Yeah, no, it's getting better because it was like very, very crazy then, and so now where we are is that no more white paper company, white paper companies. Right. Now you need to. We always recommend that raise little seed round, get the team together, start to work on a prototype. No more money raising just for the white paper.
Oh yeah,
And
you mean insofar as like what actually is required as a best practice. So I mean, what he's referring to, of course, is in the early days of the crowd sales, companies would literally have a white paper and maybe a website, and the white paper was a few pages of abstract.
Yeah.
There was nothing technical about it. Do those
so-
sometimes succeed today anymore, or
No,
not?
but now our rule on that one is that if you have a highly academic, like a really, like, you know, computer science idea, then that is still possible to take that approach. But otherwise, you should, you know, have a minimal viable product on its way at least, and team and everything. And when you asked about the flow of deals, that hasn't changed. Like, people are now, you know, want to raise more than they did a few months ago. So I think we get 10 to 30 people contacting us a day asking for ICOs. So
I get about the same number, yeah. So here's another very interesting element that we haven't talked about yet. Companies from outside the space that already have a lot of users are starting to see this as a really interesting mechanism for either growth capital that's non-dilutive, or otherwise as a means of decentralizing or even changing the nature of what they do. Alexander, your organization has been pivotal. We've worked together on Kik, for instance, which is a giant social network. Are we going to see more of this in the future?
Oh, absolutely. You know, why do companies actually go and do this, right? It's not just a fad. It's actually an existential necessity for many people. And there's no wonder that players in social media are coming out first, because it's simply impossible to have that business otherwise. But the real reason why I think there's going to be an incredible influx of those types of business models into more traditional space is actually because blockchain and alternative finance offers the kinds of user incentives that the industry has not had, you know, has not experienced yet. So let me give you an example, right? Take any space where there's a very strong incumbent player and a huge barrier to entry. Real good example, internet bandwidth, right? How do you compete with, you know, large telephone carriers that have all the wiring, that have all the contact with regulators, that have all the users, and at the same time, obviously, you have to compete with them because, you know, the net neutrality, for example, is a huge question that a lot of people are trying to, you know, rethink and address, right? Well, the only way to do it is through token economics, right? You incentivize users to come in, you offer them a token that pays for this service and then appreciates. You offer this token in larger percentage to early adopters, and there you have the additional incentive to create the hardware and put it up. Take another example, mapping in augmented reality and you know, virtual reality spaces. What would make, like, for example, things like, you know, Waze, you know, uses maps, but for example, in augmented reality space, what would make a person walk around with 3D glasses, you know, day in and day out? Offer them tokens, right? And there's countless examples of that we're going to see where, you know, new startups are going to come in. They're not new. They have a business. They have a product. You know, they may have a piece of hardware that they can use to create bandwidth. They may have a virtual reality product. But the only way for them to actually raise money and grow at this stage is to create token economics. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, really good token economics are obviously a critical and important part of, well, creating a new protocol or platform or application. But there are a lot of bad coins out there. What are the worst practices? What are the coins? What are the practices, I should say, of some of the worst coins out there? Dominic, I'm sure you've seen your fair share. What are the things you say, if I'm considering a token sale, what should I not be doing?
That's a tough question, actually. So Well, first of all, some of the, if you're just trying, if you're trying to really raise money, right, you really need to engage the people. You have to identify who are the real stakeholders, right? Who are the people that are very early adopters, that sort of thing, and engage the market to do that. And so if you expect to go out there and raise 5 million, 50 million, or whatever, and you don't have the right partners and advisors to do that, it's very, very, very difficult unless you are someone that's been in the space for a long time. But as far as like the token economics, and this is like a whole long discussion. But basically, what a lot of people, they're just bolting on a token onto some app, and that's not really what's it about. Yeah, this is kind of like the bridge area, or let's say the bridge from the old to the new. So that's sort of what people do. It's like back in the day of the .com, when I don't know what it was, but it was like anything that was brick and mortar.
It's kind of a token. It's an afterthought.
Click and mortar,
Right.
or whatever, right? And actually,
Pets.com.
yeah, pets.com. So now we actually can get dog food delivered to you online or through online, but back then it was kind of too early, and it really hadn't developed to that point yet. But the thing is that to do it really right, you think about it that you're building like a little economy of people and incentivizing, just like in a normal corporation, you have workers, right? And those workers are incented to come in to work at 8 a.m. They're incented to produce more. They get bonuses. They get promoted. That's all part of the management structure of how to run a company. And in a way, with the DAOs or whatever, it's the same thing with Bitcoin. He wanted to incentivize people to run this computer program, and so he had to give them something for it, right? Which was you get Bitcoin, and that's very, very simple. And I think the best is try to keep it as simple as possible, and then develop from there. And you just see a lot of these people like don't really get that. They're just like, well, I'm going to give them some profit. I'm like, well, that's just a security.
Yeah.
No point. Why are you doing a token? You're going to get in trouble. You might as well just issue a stock. Just do it the normal way.
Right, and I think that actually brings us to the securities token conversation. Obviously, there are a lot of tokens out there that pretend to be utility tokens, access tokens, license tokens, but the truth is they're securities. And I certainly see a lot of different companies that come to me, and whenever I ask them about, what's your coin for? Why do you need the coin? It seems like something that's an add-on to an existing app, and they're simply doing it as a way to raise money. That's certainly not going to work. What happens when there are securities tokens, when there's a relatively simple way for securities to be tokenized? What is that? How does it change the existing market, or does it at all? Rensu.
Of course, it changes massively because SEC and in UK FCA, they both have now opened of course crowdfunding. If we compare to equity crowdfunding, and then both regulators have said that one thing that they don't like on crowdfunding is that normal people can invest, but then they are on a hook for 5 years or forever on that one. So the tokenizing that gives the liquidity, because normal people can get unemployed, sick, divorced, whatever, and they need to be some way to cash out. Right. So in that sense, tokenization of securities is super welcome.
And what does that mean for the current major players? Storage is, I would say, one of the most important coins currently in the space. As I said earlier, there's a lot of partners who are going to be using you. Do you see yourself as part of the stack of, let's say, eventual securities tokens as well?
No, we're very much in the utility token bucket. We're basically going to distinguish ourselves through showing utility of our token and basically our entire ecosystem. It's really kind kind of the gas or the oil that makes the entire ecosystem go. So if you're a farmer, you receive storage tokens for providing access to bandwidth and disk space. And if you're a developer, you can pay with our token. So it's a closed loop ecosystem, and I don't think we ever want to be associated with the security.
Of course. Well, let's talk about storage, and let's talk about valuations. There are a few different players in the storage world right now. Why does the market right now think that some are more valuable than others, in your opinion?
Market's definitely not looking at fundamentals. There's a lot of hype in our individual space. Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at who actually has a product in production that anyone can work with, storage is the only alternative in our space, and I think our valuation is very attractive at the current moment. So I think that we're not focused on the price of our token. We're focused on delivering value and delivering, basically our service and really growing our ecosystem. And if we do that successfully, then everything else flows from that, and the token price will be really in a good place.
All right, guys, I think we're nearing the end of our time. So final comments. What does the future of the token market look like? John, we'll start with you.
I think it's going to be huge. I mean, I think that we're just in the very, 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 very beginning stages of what I think is going to be like a Cambrian explosion of innovation and I think value creation. So everyone here in this room, it's barely the end of the first inning. It's very early days, and I think it's going to be really impactful.
It's a very American reference there. Dominic.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's the very beginning, and I think the other important thing to recognize is that it's a shift in how people are employed, and so for the next generation of folks, like this is an opportunity for anyone around the world to get, if they're a hardware engineer, they can get involved with storage, run infrastructure, whether it's in America, Venezuela, Russia, China, whatever. Or if they're, in our case, if they're an economist or an MBA, they can get involved. They can start reviewing projects, valuing them, that sort of thing. And that might have been, back in the day, something they could only do in Silicon Valley or New York or London. And so now, as long as they have an internet connection, they could kind of plug in. And I think it's a new way of employment and sort of how labor is structured in the economy.
Ransu, what's the future look like?
Yes, 3 to 5 years, and almost all seed and SME investments will be tokenized.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, it is because then investors will ask for that as an addition to investment, because they want to see the liquidity at some point.
Alexander?
It's going to be really surprising.
I should have said that.
Okay. Well, everyone, thanks so much for having us. It's fun talking with you all. Thank you.